If you are here, you wish to know. Welcome to What's New This Week, a weekly series where I speak about different releases I found interesting, so I could keep up on you also. Don't miss out on new video game releases and stuff to watch. And the first thing we're gonna talk about today is Particle Hearts, which is, I suppose it's an indie game where the whole world made out of a giant amount of particles, and you will be walking around and explore this world and solve puzzles, and like different colored particles give you different solutions for puzzle solving and stuff. And apparently there are probably like some ancient evils that try to destroy the world, and you will have to be the chosen ones that will save it with all these different particles. The Way of the Tray. It's a pixel art game. You are a waiter in a yokai restaurant, and you'll have to also do a Tetris job, balancing the food on a tray so it won't fall, and make sure that it will be the right amount of right food to deliver to the different yokai patrons of this restaurant. So that's gonna be like a fun experience, and probably also Raining City Millions Recollections. So the main character woke up after death. The main character has a hole in their hands that millions come out from, and people are attacking the main character for their newfound fortune and stuff, and you must find a way how to survive with all of this. As I do not much understand what's happening here, but it's intriguing at least. Quartet Classic JRPG. So the studio called something classic, and they decided to make a JRPG, the old-fashioned JRPG like old Final Fantasy series, where 4 characters will travel around. You will have a party of 4 characters that will travel around the world and have an adventure, and it's in all old school, retro-looking homage to the classics of genre. Space Adventure Cobra The Awakening. So it's a platformer action, really dynamic one, based on an old anime series that I don't know of. Iconic animated series played by TMC, no one watched them. And you will play as different characters in this platformer action, travel through different planets, I suppose, and fight with enemies as the guy in a red costume, a robot girl, a woman girl, that's not a robot, apparently, and that's pretty much it. Whispers of the House. It's a cozy game when you will have to make sure to put an order inside of a house, and someone sends your shield through a mailman. That's kinda strange. When can you put it inside of a house? So you'll make sure to put an order inside of a house, and also there's secrets that you can find inside of it. The Knightling. So you're playing as little squire, something happened with the knights that you were serving, and only 6 that left your knight's magical shield. And you'll have to travel around in 4 different lands of this fantasy continent, fight with different enemies in order to find the knight, wherever he is. Super Robot Wars Y? So as far as I know, Super Robot Wars are kinda like Fire Emblem, but about different mechas. It's a crossover with a giant amount of mechas from all different series. There are a lot of video games in this series, and this is the latest one. Well, I think I may try it out. It's the question is how it is for the first time entry to try it out. Lost Soul Aside. There was one guy that was trying to make his own Final Fantasy inspired Devil May Cry game, and Sony hired him, gave him resources, and now he's making a game for them as part of the team. Surely it will finally came out and people would be actually able to play it. So it's a Chinese game made with the resources of Sony that may be a fun action. Shinobi Art of Vengeance. It's a remake of an old Sega game that I never heard about, and I do like the art style of the game. It reminds me of Mark of the Ninja. It also was a platformer Metroidvania-like game about ninja, and I suppose it's kind of the same. It looks cool and dynamic, and I want to try it out. Kaiju No. 8 the game! And it's not a fighting game, it's a JRPG. Or at least it has turn-based battles, and not only it has turn-based battles, it also free-to-play on a mobile and PC. I'm just happy it's not the usual anime fighting game. Maybe it is just repeating the story from anime, but maybe it also has something else involved. We will see. The Thursday Murder Club. So, old people, like 3 or 4 of them, decided to make a club where they try to solve murders. And there's Ben Kingsley, there's Pierce Brosnan, there's Helen Mirren, and all the old actors that we know. And like the premise of old people solving murders is not new. There was another Netflix TV series about this, but that was American, and this one is British. And like these old people find out there's a real murder, and they decided to solve the real murder and try to find the person on the inside. And I do like the premise and want to see what's this all about. Red Sonja, like remake of an old movie of Red Sonja, where the red-haired warrior in a chainmail bikini will be walking around and fighting with evil that destroyed a village or something of this matter. And considering the state of Hollywood right now, we have no idea how it will turn out. Will it be bad or good or worse? I do want this to be good, but I don't know how it will happen. We can watch it and decide for ourselves if it was good or not. And unfortunately, that's all I found interesting this week. So, if you want the channel to live and grow, please support me here on all social media, share my videos for anyone you think worth sharing, do job platforms from YouTube to Twitch to Trovo to Blue Sky to Twitter to whatsoever. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next videos.